In this segment, we're going to take a look at some of my favorite books in my photographic library. And yes, I realize you can get a lot of great books on Kindle, and I am a big fan of Kindle. I have many Kindle books, and I do quite a bit of reading on Kindle when I get the opportunity. But there's just something about owning or having a good book, especially if it's a good hardcover book with quality pages to it. Like an example, this particular book, it's called Karsch, and it has beautiful pages, thick pages, matte pages, and the quality of the images on here are just so sharp, it's as though they can just walk right off the page. So this is just something that I really, really enjoy looking at, and I read my books, even though I've read them several times. Many times I'll go back to them and reread them, or if I need to get some information, I can just go back again, because I do have some technical books that can also help you in your quest to learn photography. One of the many benefits that I get by reading some of these books by these great photographers is not just about what camera are you using, what f-stop, is your sensor size large enough, and all that stuff, but more about what that photographer is thinking and what they're about to do to take that amazing image. So to me, that's worth a whole lot more. So you know where they're coming from and how they're getting their final result on the image. So let's start by taking a look at one of my very favorite books and one of my very favorite portrait photographers. And his name is Yousuf Karsh. And I'm going to also include a link to his website. It is really amazing. There's a lot of great stuff on there where he is interviewed by many. I believe it was on 60 Minutes he was interviewed, and he actually tells a story. So you could hear it right from him, how he photographed the great Winston Churchill. It's an amazing story. Great information on the website. So that link is going to be down below. So let's take a look at the Karsh Portraits book. If you never heard of the name of Yousuf Karsh, you really owe it to yourself to check it out. At least take a look at the website and learn how he photographed all the people that he photographed. And for the time, his studio actually was in Ottawa, and he photographed just about everybody of importance at the time. People, all kinds of dignitaries, politicians, artists, authors, poets, kings, queens, you name them, and he's photographed them, all the key people in their day. Even to this day, you're going to see some of his portraits are all around you. As a matter of fact, if you go to Key West, you're going to find that famous portrait that was taken by Karsh of Ernest Hemingway. You're going to see that all over Key West. And I understand there was a stamp made of Winston Churchill not too long ago that was his famous portrait taken of the man way back then. And his work is timeless. Just beautiful work. Another favorite book is called Karsch, a 50-year retrospective. And this book is a little bit different than the other one I was telling you about, because this one starts off with a brief biography about where he came from and how he got started and how he learned his craft. And just in a nutshell, he learned many of his lighting techniques by photographing people in the theater. And that's how he came up with his beautiful style of portraiture, was by using that theatrical lighting that gave a lot of dimension to his photographs. In this book, Mr. Karsh also tells a story about how he photographed Ernest Hemingway. This is a really interesting story, so I'm not going to tell it to you. Instead, I'm going to have you read it firsthand. And another interesting book, it's actually a course. It's called The Famous Photographer's Course, put out by the Famous Photographer School. And this was the first course that I actually had in photography. It taught me all the basics, and I had some really great instructions, or they're called a guiding faculty. I was really amazed how these books are still available. Of course, the school's not around anymore, and you can still get this course. Now, the one that I have is Volume 1, and I picked this up on Amazon just because, for nostalgia reasons, because I wanted to have this. And there's a lot of, even though it's back in the late 60s, I believe it was, that it came out or that the school started, it has a lot of valuable information there about technique, about lighting, about just about everything in photography. And I believe there's 3 volumes, 2 or 3 volumes, and I just have volume 1. But this is really worth for those that want to learn the basics of photography by people that really know that, are not just talking about it, but these people made their living in photography. The guiding faculty, we have people like Richard Avedon, Richard Beatty, Joseph Costa, Arthur D. Arazian, Alfred Eisenstedt, Harry Garfield, Philip P. Hausman, Irving Penn, Bert Stern, and Ezra Stroller. All these were the guiding faculty, and in this course you're going to see their images, and they talk about how they created these images. A really great course, worth the money. And another important book is called Ansel Adams, an Autobiography. And I'm surprised today because occasionally I do ask some of the young photographers if they ever heard of Ansel Adams, and some say no. Well, if you haven't heard of Ansel Adams, you must, you have to, because he was also one of the early pioneers of getting photography to become an art form. And even though mainly he made his living as a commercial photographer, but when he started photographing all these beautiful parks and he came up with these beautiful black and white images that were sold at auction, and that actually is what made him famous. And he became a legend, not only for that reason, but because he was a perfectionist in creating the print. He knew how to photograph, and he also knew how to do post-processing. At the time, of course, it was post-processing in a darkroom. And this particular book is an autobiography, so you get to learn his whole story, and there's also some beautiful images in here. Another very important book is called Ansel Adams Examples, The Making of 40 Photographs. This book is really unique that he explains how he made and how he took some of these photographs. And in this book, he talks about one of my favorite images of Ansel Adams is called Moonrise. And he talks about the making, well, the taking, and then the making, meaning a little bit of fine-tuning and post-processing of that photograph. Really interesting stuff and great art. Another favorite hardcover book that I have is written by Mr. Philip Stewart, Cherish. It's called A Lasting Tradition. And in the book, you're going to see his beautiful studio portraits. And I got a chance to see Mr. Cherish several times. And the first time I saw him, he was given a program, I believe it was with the PPFA. It's called the Professional Photographers of America. In fact, he was one of the key players, one of the key photographers in the PPFA. I later found out that when I first started hearing his name, the masters were the ones that wanted to go see him. So he was almost like the godfather of studio portraiture. And his style of studio portraiture was just very elegant. He did it very simply, using simple lighting like umbrellas, but he was a master at posing naturally, and he just learned how to capture the expression, just like Yousuf Karsh did. Not Fade Away has some classic images in here by Jim Marshall. He was one of the key photographers in photographing not just rock and roll bands, but folk music and many musicians. And he was able to get close to these people. Not only did he photograph them on stage, but he was friends with many of them. He became friends because they actually trusted him and they got to know and like him. So he was able to go in their dressing rooms, their hotel rooms where they stayed, backstage. So he was able to get a lot of photographs which are not possible today. A great photojournalist. He also liked using an old Leica 35mm camera. Most of the images in here are black and white, and he loved photographing in natural light. He really knew how to see light and to make the best of each situation, and many of his photographs are legendary. Jim Marshall, rock and roll photographer. Here's another hardcover book in my photographic library. It's called The French Landscape, Images of a Special Light by Randy Silver. And all the images in the book were taken using a black and white infrared technique. I like this technique. I used to do a lot of black and white infrared. I still do on occasion, but not as much as I did. But this is just a beautiful book. And this is a book that's kind of special to me because Randy asked me if I could write the foreword to this book. So I was honored with that. But just a beautiful book. Randy, I believe, recently passed away, but the book is still available. Fine Art, Nature Photography, Advanced Techniques in the Creative Process by Tony Sweet. I got a chance to see Tony once in one of his lectures. Tony is a very creative and fun-loving guy, and this book is full of beautiful images that can inspire you. Eisensted's Guide to Photography by Alfred Eisenstedt. Eisenstedt was an early photojournalist. He was one of the early photographers that started using 35mm, and a lot of times 35mm at that time was considered more of a toy camera. You couldn't take it seriously, but it helped him get the type of photographs that he did. As a matter of fact, he was one of the early, I believe one of four, the first life photographers, one of four. And this book is really fantastic because it does cover his images and how he took them, and he explains his style. Mr. Eisenstedt used old Leica 35mm. He also had an old Nikon camera, and occasionally he would use a 2 1/4 Rolleiflex camera, but most of his work was done on 35mm. And also for beginning photographers, there's very helpful hints in here. Again, what he thinks when he's taking a photograph and what he's looking for. And it is just not only a great book, but a great inspiration. The Family of Man, another interesting book that has 503 images in here. And it was put together by Edward Steichen, another great photographer, and also responsible for helping to make photography an art form. And in this book, the 503 images that you see were assembled from photographers from all over the world, all different subjects, people of all kinds. They started with a collection of over 2 million images, and they had to narrow it down to 503. So really interesting book by another great artist. So these are some of my favorite books from my photographic library. And I still enjoy going in there and reading these books over and over again. And I do it because, not just because I like the images and of course have a great respect for the photographers, but I also do it to become motivated and influenced to become a better photographer. And no matter what style I particularly like, I always enjoy looking at and reading about other photographers and other styles. So if you're stuck in a rut or you need a little bit of a boost to get out of that rut, consider looking at other work and other examples of great photographers, and it's going to really expand your horizon.